Hey everybody, and welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching the Battle of Carrhae by Historia Civilis. If you guys end up enjoying this video, I would appreciate it if you would check out my Patreon, which is linked down below and has exclusive content. Without any further ado, let's jump into this reaction.
This video was sponsored by the Great Courses Plus. Three basic facts define Marcus Licinius Crassus's life.
Straight into Crassus, huh?
First, he was rich. A billionaire by our standards. Second, he used that wealth to support great politicians. I've talked before about how he was secretly funneling money to Clodius behind the scenes, but before that he did the same thing with Caesar and other populists before him. Third, Crassus's entire career was marked by his rivalry with Pompey. It started decades earlier when Pompey took credit for a war that Crassus had won, and over the years, the grievances piled up.
Which is interesting because in Historia Civilis' videos, we've seen the formation and basically the collapse of the first triumvirate, which was Caesar, Pompey, Crassus. Caesar was the rising star, Pompey was the established, respected general, politician / general, and Crassus was the money of the operation. They worked together to achieve their political goals, though, of course, like I said, we've kind of seen it fall apart, and part of that was that, one, Crassus was funding Clodius, which Caesar and Pompey were not super into, and two, Pompey decided that he would rather go it on his own. So, maybe it's surprising that they decided to work together in the first place, but also it falling apart is maybe unsurprising given the rivalry of Pompey and Crassus.
And yet, time and time again, circumstance forced the two men to work together.
Yeah.
That brings us to their second consulship together in 55 B.C.E. Late in the year, Crassus was getting...
It's kind of a... obviously it wasn't really like this, but it's sort of like maybe like a funny buddy cop thing. Like, they hated each other, but they had to work together. And all these scenarios where Crassus and Pompey were just forced to get along in public or do things together, even though they hated each other. Obviously ridiculous, but it gives off that vibe a little bit.
Ready to leave Rome and head to Syria for his 5-year term as governor. It was an open secret that once Crassus got to Syria, he intended to go to war against the Parthians. On the day of his departure...
I remember us talking about how, Crassus was a politician made by his money. Historia Civilis has already mentioned it in this video and has mentioned it in other videos. What he wanted was, some real war glory, because money got him influence, but a lot of people didn't necessarily respect him, They saw that he was a man who gained all his influence through his cash, and a lot of people didn't like that. So Crassus wanted the glory that would come from successful warfare. No one could dispute the honor of that sort of glory.
A crowd confronted him, led by a tribune of the plebs. The tribune tried to use his veto to stop Crassus from leaving the city, but another tribune stepped forward and vetoed his veto. The crowd blocked his way and accused him of going to war for his own personal greed.
True.
They refused to let Crassus pass.
Well, maybe not personal greed, but definitely personal ambition.
Until Pompey showed up and calmed everybody down. I'm sure Crassus found it super annoying that it was Pompey who had to rescue him.
Yeah, another scene in their buddy cop or star-crossed lovers movie. Pompey shows up to rescue him. Crassus, grumbling, goes along with it.
One more grievance. Add it to the list.
I love that. The whole Spartacus thing, always wants to be the center of attention. His whole personality, inexplicably popular. Seriously, he's kind of dumb and he doesn't know it. The list of Crassus's grievances against Pompey, and then had to rescue Crassus from a crowd once. Obviously, that was a favor that Pompey did Crassus, but I'm sure it got under his skin so much.
Crassus arrived in Syria early and started to get everything ready for his unprovoked war against the Parthian Empire. In the spring, Crassus took command of his legions and marched east. His son, Publius, had come from Gaul with some Gallic cavalry and was now serving as...
Well, they are pretty far from Gaul. On the mention of Gaul, lately we've been seeing a lot of Caesar in Gaul, like a lot. So I'm kind of excited to see another Roman military operation that doesn't involve Caesar. Well, presumably, maybe he gets involved. I don't think so. And is, like I said, quite far from Gaul. We're on the other side of the empire.
Crassus's cavalry commander. The army reached the Euphrates River, which marked the border between Roman Syria and Parthian Mesopotamia. He crossed the river, and just like that, Crassus had started a war with the Parthians.
Great music in this one again.
Many of the nearby settlements had sizable Greek populations, and were reasonably friendly towards Rome. As Crassus approached with his army, many of them felt comfortable surrendering to the Romans without a fight. But it wasn't always so easy. One city, named Zenodadium, sent a friendly message to Crassus, asking for a Roman garrison. Crassus sent 100 men, basically a Roman sentry, to occupy the city. When the Romans arrived, the locals ambushed them and had them arrested. Later, the entire century was executed.
Jeez.
When Crassus discovered what happened, he showed up with his entire army. He stormed the city and sold its inhabitants into slavery. For the rest of the summer, he marched all over Mesopotamia, capturing settlements and installing Roman garrisons. At the end of the...
So, kind of putting on a bit of a show, I would say, to start things off.
Season, he turned his army around and marched back to Syria. In all, his campaign was a success. He left 8,000 Roman soldiers behind, scattered throughout Mesopotamia in small garrisons, guarding his new conquests. But one thing should have been bothering him. So far, the Parthians had not responded.
Yeah, that's odd.
That winter, the king of Armenia, who was an ally of Rome, came to see Crassus. The king asked Crassus to consider invading through Armenia rather than through Mesopotamia. He said that going through the mountains would give the Roman infantry a huge advantage against the Parthian cavalry. If he agreed, the king promised to provide Crassus with an additional 30,000 infantry and 16,000 cavalry.
Good deal.
Which would basically double the size of his army.
What's the catch?
This isn't explicitly said in our sources, but I'm sure that in return, the Armenian king wanted a slice of Crassus's conquests.
Of course.
Crassus thought about it, but in the end, he refused.
Yeah, that's not terribly surprising. I mean, it sounds like a good deal, but Crassus, has come here to win conquests, He wants to prove himself, so it wouldn't do to have help from some Armenian king who's going to take part of those conquests. Crassus has to do this himself. He can't risk anybody else taking the glory. Of course, I'm psychoanalyzing here. We, couldn't know what was going on inside his head, so take that with a massive grain of salt. But, I'm just sort of judging from what we know about him that may be what was going through his mind. But, of course, we don't know, right?
His objective was to annex Mesopotamia, and so far that was going pretty well.
Right.
Our ancient sources all think that this was a stupid decision, and I can't say that I disagree. 46,000 Armenians.
And let me tell you, ancient sources, they were not afraid to let you know their opinion. We look at history today, historiography. The field of history tries to strive for objectivity, using empirical evidence to argue points. Of course, everybody has opinions, and, we forward different arguments. That's fine, but we try to back them up. Ancient historians, they were willing to just say what they thought, give their opinion, whether there was evidence for it or not, or just to make stuff up.
Is a lot of Armenians. Nevertheless, the Armenian king returned home, and the next year, Crassus crossed the Euphrates again with 43,000 men.
Sizable force, anyway. Maybe he won't need the Armenians. I mean, he just wants to take Mesopotamia anyway, and, he's doing that, but of course, it is a little worrying that the Parthians haven't shown up yet. I wonder what's going on.
So far, Crassus had made an effort to stay close to the Euphrates River, but one day, Crassus's scouts came across signs of an army marching away from the river into the desert. This must be the Parthian response. Some of Crassus's subordinates advised him to pull back into one of his garrisoned towns and gather some intelligence on this mysterious army.
Smart.
But Crassus wasn't interested in that. He ordered the Romans to march off into the desert in pursuit of the enemy army.
Once again, not to psychoanalyze too hard, because we literally don't know what's going on in his head and can't even get close, but this does seem like a man who is out for glory. He doesn't want to sit back and, maybe miss his chance. He wants to go for it.
Crassus advanced at a breakneck pace. He ordered his men to eat on the march and only let them stop for a few moments at any water sources. Crassus's subordinates continued to urge him to turn around, or at least stop at a water source for a couple of days, but he ignored their advice. After a time, some of Crassus's scouts returned. They reported that there was a huge Parthian army very close, and that they were all on horseback.
Whoa!
Crassus ordered his men to deploy in a long, thin line. This was a pretty standard tactic. Since the mounted Parthians would have mobility on their side, the Romans had to protect themselves against being flanked. Elongating the Roman line would force the Parthians to do the same, which would limit the size of any Parthian flanking maneuver. This is ancient warfare 101.
Right, fair.
But Crassus wasn't sure of himself. The fact that the Parthian army was all cavalry was throwing him for a loop. He changed his mind. As his men were mid-deployment, he ordered them to come back. He had them deploy in a hollow square. This would allow the Romans to fight on all sides.
I mean, it's not wrong to change your mind. That's okay. I mean, adapt to the situation, but, it doesn't instill confidence in your men when they're halfway through one maneuver and you say, wait a second, guys, wait a second, let's do another one. We got to do a different one. Everybody's probably thinking, okay, why are we changing? Did something happen? Why did Crassus change his mind? It's not necessarily a big deal, but, it's, like I said, not a great way to instill confidence in everybody that, you know what you're doing.
Removing any danger of being flanked, or even surrounded. On paper, this isn't necessarily the worst idea in the world, but it's definitely unorthodox. It's one of those, it's so crazy it just might work ideas. Crassus's subordinates tried to talk him out of it, but his mind was made up. The Roman square advanced as one, until they caught sight of the Parthian army. It turns out that the Roman scouts exaggerated a bit. The Parthian army wasn't that huge. In fact, it was considerably smaller than the Roman one. There were only 10,000 Parthians, facing off against 43,000 Romans. Most of the Parthian army was horse archers, with some armored heavy cavalry mixed in. The Romans were already in their little square, so the Parthian cavalry was unopposed as they immediately surrounded them. When they were in position, they began to rain arrows down on the Romans from all sides. Crassus responded by sending skirmishers forward to drive the horse archers away, but the Parthian arrows forced the skirmishers to retreat.
Yeah, the square might be a good response to heavy cavalry or cavalry charges, but definitely not to horse archers, because, everybody's in a big square all lined up, and now you're surrounded by horse archers who are just firing arrows at you. Definitely not a good situation to be in.
The Parthians continued to pound the Roman square with missiles. Now, it's not quite as bad as it sounds. The Romans knew this was coming. They were shoulder to shoulder, and everybody was protected by their giant shields.
True.
Most ancient archers could burn through their supply of arrows in like 10 or 15 minutes, so the Romans just had to sit there and wait for this to happen. Then they could close in with the enemy and fight on their terms. So they waited, and waited, and waited. The arrows did not stop.
Interesting.
It turns out that the Parthians had brought a lot of arrows. Like, a lot. Apparently they had a small army of camels with them, each weighed down with thousands of arrows.
That's interesting. And you know, if Crassus had used another formation, if you could go on the offensive, this may not work. It would disrupt the line of camels, but since everybody's in a big square, this gives the horse archers and the men supplying them a perfect opportunity to just keep firing and keep resupplying. Now, of course, Crassus couldn't have necessarily known this would be the situation exactly. It just so happens that he's used a formation which, these horse archers and their resuppliers can take advantage of.
Their only job was to run back and forth, resupplying the horse archers. They basically had an infinite supply.
Wow.
This possibility never occurred to the Romans. Their shields still protected them from the worst of it, but a small percentage of the arrows inevitably slipped through the cracks.
Yeah.
Another small percentage would hit a shield at exactly the right angle and go straight through the wood. Not very many Romans were being killed, but an alarming number were taking arrows to the arms or feet. In desperation, Crassus ordered the entire square forward.
Whoa.
Maybe if they could get close enough, the Parthians would have to stop shooting and pull back. It didn't work. The arrows continued to fall.
I think you'd have to use a more targeted assault. The whole square moving forward is just not going to be fast enough, I don't think.
This was getting bad. Something needed to change. So Crassus ordered his son, Publius, to take the cavalry and a legion and break through the encircling Parthians.
Okay.
Publius gathered his men and charged. And it worked. The Parthian horse archers turned and ran. Publius pursued. But it didn't take long for Publius to make an unfortunate discovery.
Oh no.
While retreating, the Parthian archers could turn a full 180 degrees on their horses and continue to shoot their arrows.
Ooh.
This is called the Parthian shot, and it was a devastating tactic, especially in scenarios like this.
Yeah.
But Publius and his cavalry ignored the arrows and kept up the momentum, chasing the Parthians until the rest of the battle vanished in the distance.
Okay.
Then,
well, that might not be great. You might be needed back at the rest of the battle to clear off the remaining horse archers, since most of them are still surrounding the Roman square. That's kind of why you were sent out in the first place, to do this targeted strike and try to clear the Parthians off. I fear they may be getting lured far away.
the retreating Parthians were joined by another group, doubling their size. The Parthians swung around and attacked. It was all a setup.
Yep.
Publius realized his mistake too late. His small force was...
it's a simple, classic, but effective move, a feigned retreat. And oftentimes men like Publius who are advancing, they can get caught up in the situation. All they see is their enemy right in front of them retreating. And they're saying, if we can just reach them, we've got them. We can do this. We can destroy them. But you get so caught up in that you don't realize that you're being led further and further away from the battlefield, from reinforcements, and then you quickly get surrounded from all sides. So, a simple but, very effective and often used strategy.
Immediately surrounded, and the arrows began coming down faster than ever. The infantry was totally pinned down. Publius rallied the cavalry and charged. The Parthian heavy cavalry responded and intercepted them. The Parthians were armored, and the Romans were not. Publius's cavalry did their best, but it wasn't enough.
Uh-oh.
Publius was badly wounded, and the cavalry retreated. They endured the Parthian arrows for a while longer, but eventually the arrows stopped, and the Parthian cavalry charged. Publius's men were in no condition to put up a fight. 5,300 Romans were left dead on the field, and another 500 surrendered to the Parthians.
That's brutal.
Publius ordered one of his men to kill him so that he wouldn't be taken alive. Crassus didn't know that any of this was happening. All he knew was that Publius had broken through, and that the Parthians had diverted some of their strength to deal with him.
Jeez.
Then, a messenger arrived. He told Crassus that Publius was being overrun by the Parthians. For a time, Crassus was unable to make a decision. Finally, he ordered
Indecisive again, Crassus.
the entire square forward. He would march to Publius's aid. Crassus had no idea that his son was already dead.
That's a shame.
As the Romans were getting ready to march, a Parthian horseman came forward. He started riding back and forth in front of the Roman line. He was carrying something, a spear.
Oh, no.
On the end of the spear, there was a severed head. It was Publius. The Romans had endured a lot, but this was a terrifying sight.
Yeah.
They began to lose their nerve.
Wow.
A group of Romans broke away from the army, and
you know, the Roman legions were famed for their discipline, their ability to stand strong in the face of overwhelming odds, you know, to stand strong while being greatly outnumbered. Here, they by far outnumber the Parthians, and yet this is going so badly that they're losing their nerve and trying to get out of there. You know, that shows you how disastrously this situation has gone.
tried to fight through the encircling Parthians on their own, but the Parthian heavy cavalry intercepted them and cut them down.
Jesus.
Then, the Parthians continued pounding the Romans with arrows. Finally, the sun started to set. The Parthians pulled back. They had rules against fighting at night, and besides, the Romans were on foot. They weren't going far. The Romans threw together a haphazard camp and collected their wounded. There were a lot of them.
Yeah. I'm sure, you know, a lot more wounded than dead because they've been getting poked by arrows all day. As Historia Civilis said, the percentage of those killed would be pretty low, but a lot of people are going to be wounded, and, you know, a lot of those wounded may eventually die from infection. Not to mention, there were probably also a significant number of Romans dead. I mean, you know, we saw some really bad scenes during that battle.
Crassus was inconsolable. He spent hours huddled on the ground, unable to move.
Yeah. That's a tragedy, right? You never want to see that sort of personal tragedy, but to combine it with a military disaster, and, you know, Crassus is going to, maybe he'll pull it together, but I feel he's going to really struggle to function after this, you know? And of course, a lot of this is due to his mistakes in the first place, but you can't help but feel bad for a father in that position. I mean, that's horrible. It's really, really terrible.
Warning his son. He didn't have the heart to face his men.
Jeez.
2 of Crassus's legates came forward and told the army that they were taking command and that they had the full support of the rank-and-file centurions.
Wow.
I guess if you want to be technical, you could call this a mutiny, although Crassus didn't seem to care.
I mean, yeah, that basically is a mutiny, but probably a rather uncontested mutiny, since I'm sure, you know, basically everybody agreed that something had to be done and someone else had to be put in a position of power. Crassus hadn't handled the situation well up until this point, and now he's absolutely devastated by the loss of his son. He's, you know, not going to be capable of doing anything. So yes, a mutiny, but not one that anyone's going to oppose.
The legates decided that the Romans would march straight through the night. The nearest town was Carrhae, which had walls and a Roman garrison. If they could reach Carrhae, they would be safe.
Yeah, I mean, they've really not got many other options. If they get caught out in the open again, they could be facing a repeat of the day prior, though perhaps with someone else in a leadership position, they could face it better than Crassus did. But yeah, I think they're right that their best option is try and escape to a fortified position where they can defend themselves.
They didn't bother taking down their camp. They just left it behind, along with anybody that wasn't strong enough to walk.
Jesus.
Crassus tagged along, but didn't try to reassert his command.
Wow.
Nobody could see a thing in the darkness. It was a mess. People kept on imagining that the Parthians were attacking and sounding the alarm.
I mean, think of... You've just gone through this disaster. You know, your commander has just totally fallen apart. This new haphazard situation is taking place where you're trying to flee to the nearest town. You've just left your wounded behind. Walking through this area in the middle of the night, imagine how anxious and fearful you would be. I mean, any sound, any sign of movement, you would get ready to fight. You would think the Parthians were coming to get you. That has got to be, for those men, an extremely anxiety-inducing experience. And of course, a lot of the men have just been left behind. It's truly a terrible situation.
Of the people that could walk, a ton were wounded, and after a while, they had a hard time keeping up. A whole bunch of wounded Romans were just abandoned on the march. It was bad.
Yeah.
But by sunrise the next day, most of the exhausted survivors made it to Carrhae.
Okay.
The Parthians descended on the abandoned Roman camp. There were still a bunch of wounded there, and the Parthians killed them.
Jesus.
Then, the Parthians fanned out all over the desert, looking
and I'm sure there were a lot of stragglers in that desert.
for Roman stragglers, and there were a lot of them.
Yep, there you
Some
go.
had been abandoned on the march, and some had simply got lost in the dark. The Parthians found one group of 2,000 that was walking in the wrong direction.
Oh my
They
god.
captured as many as they could. The Parthian general figured out that Crassus and the rest of the army were in Carrhae and went to negotiate. He told them that it would be in everyone's best interest if the Romans just left Mesopotamia.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably right. This has been just an insane disaster for Crassus. He just a failure in every sense of the word. The Romans are probably better off just getting out of there at this point. It's been, so bad for them.
But just to be sure, he wanted a formal peace treaty, and he wanted Crassus to sign it.
Wow.
Crassus didn't want anything to do with this. He was a broken man. But the Roman army was either near or past mutiny, depending on your definition, and they just wanted to go home. They forced Crassus to go with the Parthians.
Jesus.
A small group of Romans went with him. What happened next was very strange.
Okay.
The Parthian general made an over-the-top display about how it was so undignified for a Roman general to be walking on foot. He ordered a horse brought in. The horse arrived, and it was wearing a very expensive golden bridle. Like, obnoxiously expensive. This was meant to somehow humiliate Crassus for his wealth.
Well, yeah. You're Crassus, you're a broken man. It probably can't get much worse. He probably wasn't taking any of this in, but I feel like this seems like it's intended to basically just humiliate him. As if he hasn't been humiliated enough. He's been dragged here by his mutinous or nearly mutinous men to sign a peace treaty he doesn't want to sign, and he's basically now being mocked by his opponent. Now, of course, he did bring this upon himself. This is the consequence of his own bad decision-making, but, he's being deeply humiliated at the moment.
The Parthian general told Crassus to get up on the horse. Crassus tried to politely decline, but the Parthian general insisted. Crassus was like, okay. When he mounted the horse, the Parthian holding its reins started running back and forth erratically, smacking the animal and making it go nuts. Crassus was hanging on for dear life. The Romans stepped in. This was weird and undignified, and it had to stop. As they...
Yeah, I'm sure they're not at all happy with Crassus, but, to see a Roman commander be paraded around like this was probably completely unacceptable to them, even in defeat. They can't let this go on.
Approached, somebody drew a sword.
Uh-oh.
There was a brief struggle, and seconds later, Romans and Parthians were lying dead on the ground.
Oh, Jesus.
Crassus had been thrown from the horse. Another Parthian
Oh, no. I can see what's coming. This is, so bad.
came forward and drew his sword.
Of course.
He cut off Crassus's hand, and then his head.
Jeez, man. Wow. Well, I thought Crassus was just going to get some humiliation and then, be forced to sign the peace treaty, but there you go, he's lost his life over this. Just a horrible situation for all involved.
Later, according to one account, the Parthians mocked Crassus's wealth one more time by melting down some gold and pouring it down the throat of the severed head.
Oh,
The Parthian
jeez.
general turned around and rode back east with his Roman prisoners. He picked one Roman and told him that from now on he would answer to the name of Crassus. He dressed his fake Crassus as a woman and hired a bunch of prostitutes to follow him around.
My God. This is very over the top. I mean, they've defeated Crassus soundly. They've murdered him. And now, we've seen several very odd spectacles of humiliation. They're really taking the extra step to rub it in the Romans' face. I would say to rub it in Crassus's face, but he's dead. He's literally dead. So, yeah, this is pretty crazy.
He then grabbed more Romans and dressed them as lictors, or bodyguards, and had them follow this fake Crassus as well. He gave these fake lictors fake fasces, which normally represented the power of the Roman state. Affixed to the top of these fasces were the severed heads of other Roman captives.
Jesus.
The Parthian general took this horrific procession on tour through Parthian territory.
Well, I'm sure that would make an impression. Yeah. If you're one of those towns that had so easily sided with the Romans, you're one of the Greeks living there that's relatively fond of the Romans, I'm sure this procession would be a pretty horrifying sight to you. I'm sure people got the message.
He called it Crassus's triumph.
Wow. Oh, my God. Wow. Really, they're taking every step to mock Crassus, to mock the Romans, to mock Roman tradition. I mean, this is another level of pettiness, really.
In the end, a Parthian army of 10,000 defeated a Roman army of 43,000.
Yeah, I mean, don't let the odd humiliation overlook that fact. Usually the Romans are the ones we see beating much larger forces, but the Romans had 4 times as many men as the Parthians, and the Parthians, defeated them fairly easily, to be honest.
20,000 Romans were killed,
Jesus.
and another 10,000 were captured. The legion's eagle standards were also taken, which was an
Right.
extra level of humiliation. At the time, it was one of the worst defeats in Roman history.
Yeah.
Back in Rome, Crassus's death came as a shock. Politically,
I'm sure. I mean, it's not like he was super well respected, but he was influential. Everybody knew who he was. He's gone off to gain some glory, and then, imagine you're living in Rome as a citizen or a politician, and you hear about this. That's a pretty shocking outcome to this situation.
it changed everything. The Reform faction lost its most prominent financial supporter.
Yeah, right.
Pompey was now the richest man in Rome, and within a year, he would be distancing himself from Caesar and aligning with the conservatives. Roman politics would never be the same.
Okay, I think the audio was a little strange near the end. I don't know if that was on my end or his end, but yeah, that was a good one. I mean, you could definitely see how Roman politics would be affected by that. The triumvirate, Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey, 3 of the most important figures in Rome's politics. Crassus is now gone, and more importantly, sorry, Crassus, not to rub it in, but his money's gone. That was what was really important about Crassus in politics, his ability to fund people. He funded Clodius and the Reform faction. Now he's gone, and now Pompey's decided to go out on his own. He doesn't need Caesar anymore. So the political situation has completely changed. Wow, that was a pretty remarkable episode. I did not really expect something like that. I did not know what I was in for, clearly. That was incredibly disastrous for Rome, and for Crassus, of course. I didn't expect it to go well with the setup we were given in the first couple minutes, but that went worse than I could have ever expected. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you would check out the Patreon, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel. I hope you guys are all having a good day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.